Of items we need to cover tonight. The first item is the discussion of a text change to the land use ordinance to adopt a chapter regarding planned development overlay zones. Bryn?
I hear you.
Sorry, Mayor, no Bryn.
No Bryn?
Yet.
Yet.
I can tell you that this has been looked at by the planning commission, and it's a new ordinance. It makes the planned unit development concept an ordinance rather than a conditional use. Oh, here she is. And I just started for you. So you're on.
Okay. I'm excited. PUD overlay zone?
Yep.
Well, sounds like you explained it perfectly, John.
Yep. Any
So
questions?
so again, this is just a new chapter which we've been going over for months. That changes the PUD from a conditional use to an overlay zone, which doesn't change what they submit much. They still submit a preliminary plan, and then it goes to planning commission, but then it comes to the city council since it's now a zoning item. So planning commission recommended approval a couple weeks ago. This is on your agenda tonight for decision. Just here to see if you have any questions. The planning commission only made one change to the text that we've had the whole time, so.
The only thing I had, and I can't find my note, but I couldn't recall it didn't make any reference to the development coordinator. Are they involved in this process?
They'd still be required to have the neighborhood meeting.
I couldn't see anything in here that.
We haven't added that into you've adopted that process by ordinance, but it's not been adopted as part of the zoning ordinance at this point. So we've kind of debated whether or not we actually want to have it in the required process here. But you have adopted it by ordinance, which would require them to do it for this because it's a zoning item. So they would have to do it. We can certainly add it though.
Go ahead.
The two things that I had first, I think we had indicated that we wanted to have a minimum lot size. I think we ought to also specify a range of average lot sizes. For example, on one of the plans for the Danzy parcel, it said minimum lot number of lots, maximum number of lots. And so then from that you can derive the average lot size for that pod would be this to this, in addition to a minimum.
So maybe a range, not just a minimum?
Yeah, exactly, the range on it. And the reason for that is because when we worked with the SLR property, they had the density of 3 units per acre, which people perceive to be third-acre lots.
Right.
So I think to be even more clear with what we're zoning for our residents' benefit, be more transparent if we identify this is the range of
Not just
average,
the density, but the range of lots.
the average, not just a range of lot sizes, but the average lot size, which could be a range if we've adopted a minimum number of units and maximum number of units in that pod. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The other catch that I had on there is we've required them at the preliminary submission to identify some of those things, and I didn't see where it said that they have to specifically meet 20% of the open space. It goes on later in the section to say that's the requirement, but it's not required for the preliminary approval. And I'm trying to pull up, I'm having internet connection issues.
Yeah,
so I can't get it. But maybe we could add
So you're right, it
that
is later on that they have to do it, but you're right, it's not kind of in that first list of what they submit.
And I think they need to submit that right up front because we know that will be a requirement. I think sometimes there's a perception that if they bring in, 15%, they're trying to get away with something when they're really not. It's just the way everything lays out. So if we require that that's one of the things they check off, then that will be there before the planning commission and the public see it that initial time.
So it sounds like, so again, what you're looking at is the kind of those preliminary requirements, so I would just probably add where we have minimum lot size, again, however you would suggest phrasing it, but a range of lot sizes, maybe to include what the average lot size would be.
Right.
And then it does call out open space there, but maybe just clarify open space to meet section, whatever it is.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, the section.
Okay.
Just so that, again, they come in with that understanding that this is what we're presenting right up front to meet that.
Okay. No problem. Any other questions on that
And
one?
then if you will just consider that, I I'm okay, I'll leave it up to your best discretion on the development coordinator and how they would.
Yeah, and like I said, if we wanna add that to the ordinance, we could certainly add it generically, that it's required for all zoning and subdivision items, which is what we're requiring it for now. We wouldn't necessarily have to add it to this section. We could do it as part of the update and just add it to the overall process.
And then I was looking at, item 10-20-6,
Okay.
item B, where it says, no planned unit development shall have any area less than 15 acres.
Mhm.
The question I had coming was, how does this zoning affect acreage less than 15 acres?
This wouldn't have any effect. If you're less than 15 acres, you have to do a subdivision. You can't do a
So
PUD if
this
you're less than
doesn't-
15.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Now, where we've made some changes, are you recommending adoption tonight, or can we wait and see how those translate into a finished product?
That's up to you. I mean, I think I know what the changes are. I would be fine if you adopted it tonight, but that's always up to you.
So if you wanna adopt it tonight, we can come up with some recommended language for the amendment, or if you wanna continue it, we'll call it.
Okay. It might be wise to continue it, just so we see how the language shakes out the comprehensive issue.
Anything else on the PUD? That's all I've got.
Thank you, Brent.
I'm sorry.
No, you can-
No more?
Yes, there was one other thing. I finally got my internet to
Okay.
connect, so my document came out. The one other thing is, under the section preservation of open space, J1,
Okay.
it indicates, things like unbuildable space, et cetera, should be counted as 25%. I think we need to specify in there that, schools, churches, however you wanna say that, institutional space does not count as open space,
Agreed.
because that's not
Yeah.
in there, and I think we
And they
need to.
all ask
Everyone
for it.
tries to put it in, and we need to make sure that that's not in there, so that also needs to be included in that section.
Okay.
Let me see, I think that was it this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to item 2.2, discussion of the Anthem Utah LLC Adeline Development located here, 6200 West, 200 South. Brent?
Yes. Alan, I have a teeny PowerPoint with just a map, but we probably don't need it. It's just under planning. So the first one is the zoning. So again, this is on, really just for questions. The planning commission recommended approval of the zoning as well as the PUD, for Adeline. I'll just pull up the map, but just to, again, to see if you have any, other PowerPoint, CC. Any questions? The zoning changed a little bit from the original application. The original application was all R210. The applicant changed it so that about 50 acres, would be R121 on the south side of the property to be the larger lots with the animal rights on the south side. And you have that plan. So again, this is the,
Is this what you want?
yep, that's perfect, that's perfect. This is again the bubble plan, that the planning commission recommended. The planning commission recommended, the applicant had asked for 1,100 units, the planning commission recommended 900 units. They felt that was more in compliance with the general plan. So the applicant has amended his plan to remove those 200 units. The units have all been removed from, most of them from Pod 5, which made all those single families, so there's no more townhomes in the project.
May I ask on that,
yeah.
that then would not, does it comply with the general plan then? If they've removed the townhomes, but we've had a medium density cluster, not that I'm disappointed that we've removed them, but
Yeah.
does it comply with the intent of the
It's,
general plan?
the medium density cluster, the density in that area, is 8 to 13.9, basically 8 to 14. And these homes would all still be, probably 4,000 square feet smaller, so they're gonna be probably still right about 8 units per acre. So it still complies, again, the planning commission felt that it complied with that change. So again, you have the two items on the rezone. And then also, again, the PUD, like we talked about with the new ordinance, they're following the new ordinance. So the PUD has the preliminary site plan attached, which shows the 20% open space. They have I don't know, I go to the next one, it shows the maximum, the ranges for each pod, their open space, their overall density. They have then design guidelines, which the planning commission reviewed and approved. Think about what else they did. The design guidelines include setbacks for each of the pods, again, have architectural, for each of the pods. There was also 23 conditions that the planning commission placed on their PUD recommendation. And that's in your ordinance that you've got. So again, just really, if you've got any questions about the zoning or the PUD for Adeline. And it is on your agenda tonight as well for a discussion and possible consideration.
The only one I had, Bryn, was on the page 8 on the addendum. I think it had reference to townhomes.
In the development agreement?
Right,
Yes.
we needed to remove that.
Yep, and John has that comment, yep, we'll get that. So then, like you said, Mayor, you do also have the development agreement, which I think John has a few comments about, if you don't have any specific questions about the PUD.
So in the development agreement, the ordinance that I drafted allows us a little bit of flexibility to make some technical changes. And I'll just identify what those are. For example, the last holdout is B with a dot in front of it. L period, C period instead of LLC, so that continues to the whole document several times. There's reference a couple of times to the owner that we needed to add. And then party is a capitalized word instead of a small word or a small p in paragraph 10.1. And we added, of course, that's consistency from LLC. And then to remove on addendum 1, paragraph 4, the reference to townhomes. So it ought to just say senior housing. Other than that, I think it's ready to go.
What page was that on the senior housing?
Oh, it's page 8, paragraph 4
Or on your packet.
Of the addendum or?
of the addendum.
Oh, yeah.
So if you pass it, go ahead and say these changes as identified by the city attorney. We'll make those changes.
A philosophical question I think the council needs to wrestle with is on page 3 of the addendum, and that would be page 55 of the packet. And it states, the city acknowledges owner master developer attempting to obtain zoning master development agreement and other entitlements to develop the additional property under the jurisdiction of Salt Lake County. And it goes on to say, if they're successful, then we'll annex it as long as the development rights obtained over the county are incorporated into a master development agreement. So we're basically saying whatever they get in the county, if I'm reading it right, we just agree to adopt. Carte blanche.
Kind of defeats the purpose.
And I think, yeah, to your point, Jared, it defeats the purpose of us having our own planning and zoning and council legislative authority. And then I also have a concern, John. It says the words vesting the additional property with the same terms as provided in the master development agreement. What is meant by same terms? Is that the same density and ratio of property zones as the current development agreement, or what does that mean?
Read it. I think it references to the vesting
I'm on
concept.
page 55 of our packet, which is page 3 of the addendum.
55?
Correct.
I think it references to the same concept of vesting. So they plant it in the county, they offer it to us, and if we want it, we can take it. And you're
Well,
right.
But it says same terms as provided in the master development agreement, which I think by reference means this agreement. So we're saying we're agreeing to the same terms as what we're stipulating in this agreement, but same terms what? Every jot and tittle here is what we're going to draft a new development agreement with? Or is it just applying to the zoning, or just the density, or just the mix?
She doesn't
Yeah,
have, she doesn't have that phrase, that's what she's missing.
Execute, okay, down below, they've added this, I'm sorry. So these are a couple of additions, and this is one I didn't identify. So it'll say vesting, let me just find where this thing starts, okay? Vesting the additional property in the same terms as provided in the master development agreement executed with the county. So we've added executed with the county that references those same terms.
So the county will do a development agreement,
Yes.
and then we'll just agree to adopt whatever the county stipulates.
That's exactly right.
Are we all good with that?
No.
Okay.
Well, but,
I was just
but,
checking.
but in theory though, we can't stipulate property we don't own. The city doesn't have ownership.
We wouldn't have ownership of it anyway, we don't own any of this property.
Right, I'm just saying, can we, I guess the question to John is, we really can't dictate what's to be there if we don't have ownership of it.
What we're saying though is we're adopting this agreement that binds us to whatever the county decides to do, and we don't have to agree to that. We have no obligation as a council to agree to this type of a term.
Yeah, and I just say, Mayor, what Jared's saying, we don't own it within the city boundaries. We don't own it.
So even if it's outside the city boundaries, it's correct. And frankly, I've spent hours and hours on all this stuff that I think should be brought in a public meeting rather than a work meeting, but on this particular point, this defeats the entire purpose. If you look back, every meeting this has been discussed, the mayor himself has said several times, actually in the minutes of the minutes that we're going to approve for every one of these meetings, it's mentioned that we want to have some say in how that's developed. We want to have it in within our city boundaries so that we can have some say in how that's done.
Yeah.
This says we will have no say. It takes all control away from us. It says the county will work that out and we'll just take whatever they decide.
And that's always been the issue of having the county plan and zone it too as well, and that's why I feel like I've been trying to be aggressive on trying to work out kind of a package deal on this, and I don't like the direction that the county is going and how they're developing this specific piece. And I think, and I don't know if maybe Justin or someone can answer this question for me, but my understanding is if you mentioned a while back about the connection to the water piece that he wouldn't be able to connect to. Is there any legal bounds that we can stop him from connecting?
We took it out.
To the water.
It was in there, it got taken
Yes,
out.
it's out, but as what I'm saying is, there's not gonna be any other future agreement where he can connect to water to make that happen, right?
We have a current ordinance that states that we do not supply water outside of our current boundaries.
Okay, so it is extremely difficult to bring in any type of water on that piece of project, is what I'm understanding.
I'd like Justin's opinion on it. What are some other possibilities if a developer wanted to develop and we would not be supplying their water rights? How would that
So
work?
they could develop their own special service district. Then the issue is where do they get the source of water? Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District is probably the first place. You have to meet their restrictions. They have certain guidelines that you have to follow. You have a minimum of 500 acre feet per year you have to purchase, and it's a same contract we have at take or pay. So you use it or you don't, you still pay the same amount. So I'd assume they stop and follow those, unless they had an agreement with them. Then if they had groundwater or other sources, they could probably use those. And I'm sure that the landowner does have some, whether it's enough to service the property they're developing, or if it'd meet culinary standards, I don't know.
There may be some adjoining properties that have existing water infrastructure that could be tapped for this as well. Is that correct?
Possible.
How far out would that happen?
The availability of being able to use or start their own service district and those things, or connected to Jordan Valley. Jordan
Both.
Valley, So there's a lot of infrastructure that had to be installed to connect to Jordan Valley. If they connected directly to theirs, the closest water source they have to Jordan Valley would be 118th South. So they'd have to go a long ways to the north to extend pipe works to do that.
And that's pretty expensive.
It'd be expensive.
Okay. So, I think that would be maybe a good negotiating point, just take this out where it's gonna be difficult for the developer to get water, but it's gonna save him some money, obviously, and have a better process if he's willing to work with the city on that piece of property to connect to the water. So we could use that as a negotiation tool for that other piece to reduce the zoning or change the zoning or any type of density.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to do that because I'm not convinced that we don't have statistics or data on what it would take for them monetarily to connect. We're not privy to their financial information. It could be well within their reach to do that, or it could maybe not be. We don't know, but I don't know that we want to be obligating the city or thinking that we have a negotiation point when we actually don't. So, again, my preference is I don't think we want to at all accept anything from Salt Lake County and what they're dictating to us.
Absolutely not.
And I feel that fails in this case, so I'm not amenable to this. I also believe just in principle, we shouldn't be reviewing this annexation. We can review it, but certainly not adopting or preparing to adopt this annexation agreement prior to the referendum process being completed.
I'll second that one. On this particular point, I'll agree that some negotiation needs to take place. This is the one thing that has been said during this entire process, say for at least the last 12 months, is that we're overly concerned about this 900 acres and we want to find a way to tie it to being within our boundaries so that we can have a say in that process. This doesn't do that. This does the opposite. It takes all of that away from us. If the purpose of pushing this development agreement ahead to meet whatever deadline we have of the 31st or it reverts back to that was all predicated on the 900 acres. We have had no discussion, we have had no negotiation of any kind in any way, shape, or form about the 900 acres. How in the world could we include it in this agreement at this point when we've had no discussion? Definitely not in this form.
Anything else?
Okay,
So would we just take that whole piece out then,
You know,
for right now?
Well, so let me just make a couple comments. So one of the requirements you put in here is put on this development agreement, or the 2017 plan, is that they annex the 900 acres into the city.
Right.
And this is the developer's attempt to satisfy that requirement. Basically, it's a right of first refusal, do you want it or not. So, and I think you hit on key points.
Yeah, I think the challenge to what is written here, it does what John says it does. It does give us that ability to annex, which we've asked for, but it does not allow us to set the terms. It allows a different entity to set the terms, and that's what needs to be reformed in this agreement. So we're not at all close to adopting it. We couldn't just strike that because it doesn't meet the definition of what we were looking
Right.
for in that 2017 general plan.
We need to, the wording of the motion on September 13th was a contingency for an acceptable development agreement for the 900 acres, which must be completed by December 31st, 2017. If this did not happen, the plan would revert to the original general plan. So the whole reason we're doing this development agreement, Craig, is to satisfy that requirement.
Yeah, but,
Despite all the problems that it poses in itself with the referendum and everything else, in and of itself, that part would have to be ironed out.
My take is we're not ready to move forward with this. We've got to rework this.
that's just one.
I think we could give staff some direction of what we want to see, but I think we would need to coalesce around what do we want to see in that 900 acres. To accomplish that, we need to know what are the options, what does everyone feel good about. We'd be back to almost a general plan process again, just for specific
What can we
development.
negotiate?
Right.
What is the property owner willing to negotiate?
Well, maybe we can just ask that right now, just see if there's anything that we can start the discussions.
This is
kind of
right
start.
term for it, but I mean,
Well,
that's
it's a work meeting, I mean, it's
that's
a
the
good time to
overall-
maybe bring it up and start brainstorming some of this stuff and not hold
I
another
know-
meeting just to.
Bruce, would you like to comment on that? I know we've talked about
I know
it.
we'd all like to have that,
Right, we'd like to
Agreement.
know what it is that they'd like to do with the 900
but just
acres.
to say, yeah, we'll accept whatever the county agrees to. Yeah, that's kind of a non-starter.
But the reality is, we don't have to accept it.
If we agree to this, we would, Mayor.
No, you got first right of refusal, is that right, Bruce? We don't have to accept the 900 acres, is that correct?
Mayor, the intent was that you don't have to accept the 900 acres in any way. We have to provide services in some other fashion. But because of certain actions earlier in the summer, which where we were led to believe that there was a reasonable way to deal with this, it delayed us a couple of months, and we weren't able to put together a process to deal with the 900 acres in detail. And no one would agree to annex property into the city, not knowing what density would be granted to the city. So the compromise that we worked here was that we would offer it to the city with the county zoning, and if the city wanted it, the city could take it with the county zoning. It is, I believe, incorrect to say that the city wouldn't have any input, because I've spent enough time with the county to know that the city would be there, various residents would be there, council members would be there, expressing their opinions to the county, and the county is certainly likely to listen to those. And as Craig pointed out, there would be a secondary point of leverage in terms of the water service. But I do not believe that there is going to be any agreement between now and the 31st of December, or frankly, December of 2017, or December of 2025, or December of 2035, to agree to annex 900 acres of property into a city without knowing what you're going to get in it.
And I would agree completely with that. I think the only point that I would disagree with is with respect to various residents would be there and those elected officials would listen to us. Certainly they would, absolutely. But would they act in the way that we would act?
We don't get the vote.
Right, we are not the legislative body that would then be making that decision, and that's a challenge.
The other thing I might push back on a little bit, Bruce, is Doug actually stated in that meeting on the 13th that he would be okay with that proposed general plan and the density in that 900 acre area.
I don't believe that that's correct, but the point is, we're simply, there's no practical legal way that I could recommend to Doug, or that he could sign an agreement agreeing to annex, and frankly, it wouldn't be binding on the city anyway. Whatever promises you make today wouldn't be binding on a development agreement in the future for you guys. So even if you approved it tonight with 20,000 units on it, just to pull a number, it wouldn't be binding in any way. So committee, it would be binding on you, it would be potentially binding on Doug. And this is, I think the question that Ms. Mosier answered at the start is, this is a philosophical decision on a yes or no vote on this issue. Because if you vote no, then the general plan dies and you go back to the entire 2014 general plan for the entire city, and you lose all control over the 900 acres in the future. And that's a philosophical choice. Your staff has negotiated as much, and the mayor has negotiated as hard as anybody could possibly negotiate to reach this compromise position. And if this compromise position is not sufficient, then the answer is to vote no.
Bruce, I just heard you say, and I must have misunderstood, that you said first that you could just pull a number out of the air, to 20,000, and then I thought I heard you say both that we could commit to it and we couldn't. What was it?
You didn't hear me say that.
Okay, please help me understand.
What I said was that if you pulled a number out like that, it wouldn't be binding on a future city, even a future city council in an annexation development agreement, even if you made that decision now.
John, could you help us and help me understand why that would be? If we could do this in a development agreement and we could stipulate that we would allow the county to zone it and then take it, why couldn't we specify the density or the prescribed zoning and then also agree to annex it? Should that all
That's not what I
be
said.
sorted out?
That's not the question that I was answering.
I think you can. I think Bruce would agree that if you have an annexation agreement, we could enter into some of those terms. Now, for the absolute best protection of the city, just do the annexation, then there's no question.
But there was never been a possible way to get that done because of delays caused by certain council members over the summer, that ate that clock up. There's simply no way to get that done by the time of December 31st. Hasn't been for several months.
Well, I'll push back and point out that you guys asked that this be delayed 6 months in the first place.
Well,
If you wanna throw a blame around, we can play that game.
Well, I'd rather not go into that discussion.
To your point, Bruce, you're right. At this point, I think we're too far down the line to be able to get a plan reasonably worked out that receives the proper vetting. So it does go to whether or not this agreement is palatable or not. And then what would happen if it's not? Yes, it goes back to the 2014 general plan, but it allows another stab at it, going through the same process and having plenty of time to vet the possibilities and build the commercial back in and work with the developers and consider the 900 acres. It just wouldn't, it wouldn't be the same people in these seats, but it'll be a new council that would have that opportunity. So certainly, all is not lost if this development agreement does not pass. There's ample opportunity to negotiate a new one.
Well, this development agreement is a yes or no vote, and no one can predict the future. What I would tell you is that at some point you're pushing, risking a lot of upside in this plan for the potential of the future that you may think that you want, but the number, there's there's a handbook online about how to oppose development projects, and the number one tactic for opposing development projects is to always say delay, and that it's never good enough and we can always make it better. At some point you have to vote yes or no, and that point is probably tonight.
So the original question is, are we willing to negotiate on 900 acres?
No. We're willing to negotiate it with the county with the city's input. Absolutely, with the county with the city's input.
Points made then.
Right. Yeah, negotiate it with the county with city input doesn't mean negotiate it with the city, and that's an entirely different thing, I think, philosophically for this
The
body.
risk to us would be enormous. Unlimited risk.
You have those exact same risks without this development agreement. You're not adding a new risk by executing this development agreement. That is the current risk that you face now.
Except for it does seem to indicate that we have some not requirement, but there's definitely a heavy hand of suggestion that we are then some way obligated to.
We're okay with
not at all.
That process, that's not.
Not
And
at
to be
all,
okay with the county
Madam
process.
Councilwoman, not at all, because at that point I will call up the language from the former First Lady Nancy Reagan. If you don't like the county's development agreement and don't want to annex it into Harriman City, all you do is just have to say no. It would require 3 votes.
Right, but at that point, it's already approved and already has impacts on our infrastructure,
And
our
it would
schools,
be
our
whether you-
congestion, our roads.
And it would be whether you sign this development agreement or not. This development agreement does not change the trajectory of the county development of this project in any way whatsoever.
I think that, thanks Bruce, I think that really helps clear things up, because I think it's been held out to residents that we need to push this through because of the threat that this is going to the county. And what you've said unequivocally is it's going to the county no matter what. It's not even an option to bring it here unless we take what the county gives us.
Let me be clear, Councilman. There is a possibility that we could choose to run parallel processes in the city or the county in terms of the development agreement. That is a possibility. It always depends in part on the people sitting in the various chairs that actually vote on this. And there is a possibility, this property would rather be in the city. It would rather be in the city with fair and reasonable consideration as opposed to the delays and unreasonable demands that certain council members have tried to put on this project. And that's...
Now I'm confused because that's opposite of what you just said.
No, it is not opposite of what I just said. It is not the least bit the opposite of what I just said. What I said is, if I can make this clear, the developer is willing to discuss a reasonable development on this project and all on the 900 acres, and always has been. However, given the course of the development of other projects, including Adeline and the 60 acres and other projects, and the dealings with certain city council members on those projects, the lack of faith and trust in the ability to get things done on a reasonable period of time without being unreasonably stalled and nickeled and dimed by certain council members has led the developer to conclude that, at least under the prior people sitting in those seats, that may not be feasible. That may change. And the developer has been for the last decade or more, been willing to work extensively with Harriman City and your staff, which is excellent, and they've done a great job. And if we could get a reasonable development agreement in a reasonable time with the city, we would do that. We could work in conjunction with the city. It simply came to a point where, in part because of certain actions, we had no choice, and you imposed a condition that gave us no choice. And council member, you in part delayed the consideration of other things based on some representations of where you were going that led us to not force the issue for a couple of months in the summer. And that's where
So
we
you're referring to when I reached out to the property owner to see if we could find some agreement.
I'm referring to the fact that you made certain statements that led to certain beliefs about reasonableness and willingness to work that later turned out to be not fulfilled, shall we say.
How so?
Well, I don't want to go into...
No, you won't make accusations. You go right ahead.
Well, I don't want to go into the details here, but the point is we got to a situation where we simply had no choice but to move forward on the 300 acres separately from the 900 acres as a simple matter of clock. There is simply not enough legal time to have done the 900 acres in that time, especially considering the stalling and the delaying tactics of a couple of council members that prohibited even this from moving forward, slowed down the other projects from moving forward. And it became...
So I think we need to know one thing, and we can move on. It's the same question we started with. Are we willing to discuss the 900 acres? Are we willing to negotiate on the 900 acres? You made contradicting statements.
I did not make contradicting statements. Let me be clear. Sometimes people think that negotiation involves only doing what you want. And Doug has already given up several...
You made the statement, no, we will do it in the county.
Doug has already given up several hundred units on this project from his initial starting point. He's negotiated approximately 60%, 40% down from the initial number and change the layout of this project. That's negotiation, and that was in good faith with the staff and the planning commission over time. There is no way to write a provision in a development agreement now that says we will negotiate the development, the entry of a future development agreement acceptable to both parties as some kind of condition. There's a Utah Supreme Court case that specifically says that that kind of agreement to agree is invalid. The case is called Brown Shoe versus, I can't remember who else. That agreement is not binding on either party in that situation. There is an unequivocal willingness.
Okay,
As
we
this,
need-
let
we
me,
need
there
to-
there is
we
an
need to
unequivocal
simplify
willingness.
so we can move on.
There is an unequivocal willingness on behalf of the developer as part of the development of the 900 acres to involve the city, to work with the city, to try to be good neighbors with the city, hopefully to be part of the city. That's absolutely 100% clear. But the way this has been forced into a clock by the actions of certain city council members, there is no other alternative besides this language that's in this agreement tonight. And we will be happy to work with the
So-
city.
So, two things, so you, and correct me if I'm wrong. When it comes to this agreement, this is the only thing that you would consider as far as the 900 goes?
We have worked very carefully.
Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no question. We have worked very carefully with your staff and your council to try to figure out a legally binding, legally functional way to make the best commitment we could make, and that's the best commitment that we've made here. You know, that's the answer to that question.
It's not an acceptable one.
Well, that's why there's a vote.
Why are we talking about the 900 acres at this point?
Because that's, if you look at the minutes, that's the entire reason that you all have driven this development agreement is so that we can tie that 900 acres in.
And that's why I'm willing, I would recommend just taking this whole piece out, saying that we would agree to Salt Lake County's approval. But however, if what they're saying, and John, maybe you can help correct this, but if there was a parallel process between the two entities on that as it's proceeding through, could we do something like that? To where the city actually has a say on the 900 acres as well? Because I think in addition to that, there's also a 1,200 acres that is probably gonna be an area of concern in the near future as well. Because if it's a parallel process.
You could do a parallel process in the city, but it's not binding.
Binding by the city or Salt Lake County?
Unless they annex, it's not binding on Salt Lake County. So,
And the reason why we can't just strike that paragraph, again, to reiterate, as I've understood, is that is what fulfills the requirement that was stipulated, that the
Exactly.
900 acres be included in the development agreement. So if we strike that, it does not meet.
But
the
not
terms
under the
at
county's
all.
control.
So that's where the
Right,
comment of this is a yes or a no.
And this is where I have been stressing for a long time. I have stated that this is going through the Salt Lake County process. I was told specifically, no, it's not, but yes, in fact, indeed it has. And it's going through the process. I'm very frustrated that I brought that to everyone's attention, and now we're down discussing this now, which this should have been discussed a long time ago, and I tried to bring it up then.
We all brought
Because
it up.
we are going to be impacted with that 900 acres, whether we control it or not at this point. I caught it early on and I wanted to work something out so the city has control of the 900 acres. And we do know that there's an additional 1,200 acres. And I think if I recall, there's been comments saying that it's difficult for the developer to get water outside of Harriman City. So to me, that's a negotiating point for the city to say, you can't get water unless you're gonna negotiate some of the density in this area. In addition to that whole area, there's also the USU Extension School that's being talked and discussed about, like we've talked about for years. And that's, I don't know where that's at, but that's always kind of been in the plans if that piece was brought into the annexation of Harriman City.
Right, and I think your plan was to have that USU extension defined in the 900 acres, is what I understood, and it's nowhere in here as a
And I was
definition.
gonna get to that, and that's why I'm bringing that up, because I think we all discussed that.
We've discussed it for a
For
long time.
years, yeah. It was supposed to be the Adeline project, it was supposed to be in the Anthem, it's been in different places.
So this concern that was being brought through the process of Salt Lake County, nobody listened to me. And now we're at this point.
We've all
I think we've all
talked
been
about this,
involved
yeah.
in those discussions. This
I
isn't
kept
just
bringing
you.
it up and everybody kept saying, well, that's just a threat, he's not doing it. They can't do that.
No,
And they've been going through the process.
we've all recognized that there is that process, but what's changed, Craig, is that this is a development agreement that we received 2 meetings ago.
You're right, and that's why I think we
it's
take out the
not-
part where
But
it
you
says
can't-
entitlements to
can't do
develop the
that.
additional property under the jurisdiction of Salt Lake County.
But you can't,
Yes,
because
you can.
you,
With all due respect, you absolutely can, because by definition, any later ordinance controls over any prior ordinance. You certainly could take the entire reference to the 900 acres out. We put that reference in there at the city's request to give you the first right of refusal on the property, because it was the best we could do between now and the 31st of December, given that we had been delayed and it was impossible to get the 900 acres through the, a meaningful annexation process this year, this cycle.
however, again, if we struck the whole paragraph, it takes out the intent of what was proposed in the general plan adoption.
It would undo that intent.
Right, that's what I'm referring to.
Well, and I don't wanna remove it, Craig, because
I don't either.
that's the one link we have to the 900. If we don't, then we have nothing.
But it's untenable.
But it's the unknown at this point.
Exactly, you're right, Craig.
I would just reiterate,
And that's always the whole issue. I would rather take that out. Cause I'm not gonna agree to Salt Lake County, have them plan our city.
Councilman, I do need to respond to one thing. What has happened in the county today is that the county has passed an enabling act that allows them to consider large master plan developments. No plan has been submitted to the county for this project. What they've adopted is an ordinance that we proposed a few months ago that's similar to an ordinance that had adopted in several cities that say standard zoning doesn't work on mega projects, and this development agreement becomes the zone, and the county has adopted that ordinance, which is simply an enabling act. There's been no proposal filed with the county for development of this project.
Which I think is a good clarification. Because I think we all would like to sort of kind of maybe clarify some, or maybe try to ease some tension. Having a parallel process would make sense. That gives us the ability to negotiate. And I don't think any of us are against that, and that was my question earlier. So I think I understand where you're at now, Bruce, as far as this particular agreement goes. You guys are looking at this as, it's yes or no in this agreement, but as far as future and going through a parallel process, you're not opposed to that.
Sure,
Okay.
but you can't put it, as a matter of.
I understand not having, being able to tie that
There's
to
no
this. I
legal
understand.
way to write two jurisdictions having
I understand.
parallel control over the property. But there is no question that there's a perfect willingness to discuss this with the city. If the city wants to be reasonable and fair in the density and not delay things like, with all due respect, asking me to define the word detached, which is just a delay for 2 weeks on a project, that doesn't engender good faith in terms of negotiating with an entity. It's very difficult for a developer to negotiate with 5 council members, 7 planning commissioners, staff, attorneys, engineers, etc. And that's a difficult process, but we've done it, and that's why you're seeing 900 units as opposed to 1,500 units. This developer has shown a massive willingness to work with this city, and frankly, we've had a great working relationship with all of your staff over the last several years, and your staff has done a phenomenal job, and the mayor has done a phenomenal job beating us up on these kinds of things. That's why you're at 900, not 1,100, not 1,300, not 1,500.
Okay,
So it's the
let's,
same
let's,
issue for this.
let's move on. I think we've got a number of items. I think we've hashed
Well,
that.
I know we have a number of items, but I still think that there's gotta be something, could be just something simple in there.
Bruce, do you have any suggestions? Is there anything that you could provide?
The most I could suggest, Mayor, Mr. Mayor, is that, we could, and I haven't discussed this with Doug, but the city, the developer could in theory, and again, let me back up for just a second. The difficulty, Mr. Mayor, is that we're running against a very hard clock established by the city and a propensity of some people to delay as opposed to negotiate. And that's, but with that having been said, it's theoretically possible to commit to run a petition to get a development agreement in both jurisdictions at the same time, and we could choose from whichever one we liked. But I think you're downplaying the fact that this is already in the county and that the county will give a large amount of deference to you, that you're not losing anything by this provision. This provision is simply status quo of what's happening now. It doesn't require Doug to go through the county. It allows him to go through the county. It doesn't require you to annex with the county. It requires you to consider annexing. But none of that is different than where you sit now. You are in a no worse situation with this development agreement concerning the 900 acres than you are today or you will be on January 2nd. You're in this gives you a better position than you will be on January 2nd if you don't approve it.
So I guess the 900 acres is what is going through the county is basically putting a footprint on that. And I understand there's some acreage of commercial on that 900 acres as well.
That's what I forgot to say. When you mentioned the Utah State University, that is considered to be part, we're hoping and planning on having the Utah State University in the 900 acres. Absolutely hoping and planning to have that in there. Along with the associated density that would need to go along with a university, such as for student housing and those kinds of things. This is a big project, and we would love it to be in Harriman City.
So I guess the toss-up on that, if it goes through the county and then if the commercial shows it's more profitable, is that something that we want to come into the city? Where we actually receive additional commercial revenue from it?
I think at that point, you need to do a financial analysis to say, hey, is
Yeah,
it profitable?
exactly.
Is it good for us? If it's not, then we just say, leave it in the county. There's nothing that binds us to it. If it's not gonna be favorable for us, we can not pursue it.
But this says we're agreeing to this process.
Do what?
I view it differently. This basically says that we agree to their process.
Well, that's why I say take that completely out. What?
But you can't.
Yeah, we can. We can take that portion out.
You can make a motion, change it, whatever you want on this,
But what's the repercussion?
except, does it may nullify the intent of your previous adoption, your previous ordinance.
But you can do that legally because any later ordinance controls over any prior ordinance.
Or you can just tinker with it.
Would there be any willing to stop negotiations with the county and going through that process and then talk to the city first? Would the developer agree to something like that?
one, if I may for a second? There, we would be willing to agree to use good faith negotiation efforts for 60 days to try to determine whether there is a reasonable possibility of getting density in the city. That a density, and I shouldn't say density, this density fetish just drives me crazy. A master plan including uses and layout and other things in the city before filing an application with the county. And we'd be willing to, Craig, let me add one more thing. We'd be willing to bust our butts in the next 60 days to do that. You wanna have work meetings? You set it up, we'll be there. You wanna have joint work meetings with the planning commission and the city council? You set it up, we'll be there. You wanna have meetings once a week with staff? We'll be there. We will do everything we can in 60 days to see whether there is a good faith ability of the city to deliver on a plan that works economically and from a planning standpoint and viability before we go to the county.
So before they go to the county.
Well, Bruce, would you put that in the development agreement?
It'd take about 10 minutes to write, Mayor.
Okay,
Mr.
maybe we
John-
can get back to that and then discuss it in the meeting in there then, that portion of it.
It'd take 10 minutes to write it. You could do it as a motion and allow the city attorney to tell you that it substantially complies with the spirit of what your motion is, so you could adopt it tonight.
Okay.
Right. Let's go on to item 2.3, discussion of the Danzy development.
Mayor, can I just bring up one item?
Okay.
You had discussion on 2.1, the land use ordinance of the overlay zone. 2.1.
No, I'm not.
She's talking to Alan.
Oh, sorry, I heard words and if the council is going to choose, and you get to do whatever you want, to adopt the resolution for the rezone or the development agreement, we're instructing you need to adopt 2.1 first with the changes you said, or if you delay adopting that, then you shouldn't adopt 2.1 and 2.2. That's already placed in this order, so you're aware of those issues. Just
Just to be clear, so if we think we've got an agreement on the development agreement, then we do 2.21, 2.22, and then 2.3, the development agreement in that order?
Yeah.
But how would we know if we had a development agreement?
No, not necessarily development agreement. I'm just talking about the zoning and the PUD.
He's talking about the new PUD zone.
Just the PUD zone, because when
You
they
have to approve that
apply,
chapter
they apply
before
under
you
the
can-
new zone coming through, and so we need to have the new zone adopted. So I'm not talking the development agreement.
So which one is it
Applies to
on?
development agreement.
Which is the one that would be open for the
So
consideration?
staff is gonna recommend to you that you adopt 2.1.
Well, on your end is 6.1.
It's all under,
It's
yeah.
6
Oh,
point,
sorry,
it's
sorry.
6 point.
You need to adopt 6.1, if you're gonna do anything, you need to adopt 6.1 and 6.2, which is the
I was
new
referring
PUD
to-
chapter and the new site plan chapter, before you approve anything for them, so that they're vested under those, who've adopted those first.
So those are the rules we've been working with in this.
So that's why you've got them in the order.
That's why they're first in order, yeah. Cause they've been working under them, yeah.
Okay. All right, John, or Bryn, do you wanna do the
You
Danzy?
wanna do this?
Yeah.
Wanna take a break? What do you wanna do, Mayor? Whatever you want.
Forge
Top?
ahead.
Okay, let's do it.
This should just be a few, because just for everyone's information, this item did not get approved by the zoning. It was
The planning
continued.
commission did not make a recommendation on this, yep, so I just, yeah, this
So
will just be real quick
this will
for
be very
questions.
quick and brief, so.
So again, the, Danzy development, again, three items, the zoning, PUD overlay zone, including the plan, and the development agreement. They have done similar to what Adeline did, they added about 67 acres of R121 to their zoning plan. The planning commission, I don't believe, had any, issues with the R121. And then, Alan, can you go to the next one, sorry. And then their site plan, again, planning commission, had quite a bit of discussion about this. So they did not make a recommendation at this point. And the applicant is working to address those questions before it goes back to planning commission probably next week. So again, this is just here for you if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything. The planning commission in general talked about where we had adjusted this side to R121, they had adjusted the lot sizes really accordingly. So they had small lots in the R121, which doesn't make any sense. If they're gonna have the R121, they should have larger lots for animals. So they are making those changes to make those the larger lots and move some of the smaller lots, average it the other way. They also asked to see some buffering next to some of the existing homes. So they've added some additional landscaping and buffering against the existing homes. They also asked to see, I'm looking at my planning commissioners, some of the trail connections. They show the kind of the major trail here, and how the trails would connect north and south into the schools. So they're adding those to the plan. Those were some of the biggest concerns. And then the overall calculation of density, how the schools count into the density calculation. So they are making those adjustments to the plan. And then if I have it by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, they'll be on next week's agenda, probably. So.
Mayor, could we ask the planner
Yeah,
to
yeah.
add some additional?
Yeah, a couple
I think
other
there were
things.
two other things.
We talked about the location of some of the product types in there.
Mhm.
So they had I believe it was the senior housing showing still in pot 15.
Exactly, so
Part
they
of
moved that out.
R121, we felt like that was, again, for purposes of larger lots and some of the animal rights and things that zone is intended for, that was probably not the appropriate location for that product type. To move it back up, where she talked about some of the additional buffering. We still talked about pot 18 in terms of the potential townhouses, and if, again, that was the best location for that. There was some discussion back and forth on that. Again, she talked about the trail connections as well. And then really the last item was the density calculation overall and how it's illustrated in the tables, in particular to the two pods for the school. It was the impression of the planning commission that the density is actually higher than it's currently shown in the tables there, because the land for the schools is still part of that calculation. And then it shows at another point that if the schools don't in fact go there, there's more potential density that goes with it, which we felt like potentially skewed those numbers, and so we wanted that to be addressed to really be able to clarify that.
Yeah, like I said, we've met with them today, and they're trying to work through all those changes on the plan,
I
so.
think there was also a request, I'm not sure if it got traction or not, to move, I think it was pod 8, the middle school, to the east, to try to put that back in, and I think there was some discussion about
that, yeah.
whether Jordan School District was amenable to that before that was taken, so I thought somebody was gonna run with that and see what Jordan School District thought.
There was I know that was a discussion. The school had, from my understanding, had selected that site, and there was some discussion on how that tied in with the the transportation master plan as well, and how it would accommodate those things in the areas. I know Blake was looking at a couple of those items as well.
Right, and I think it was a congestion issue and putting the schools close to each other again and
We talked about
related
that,
issues.
yeah.
And then the one thing that wasn't brought up there, but I mentioned it earlier in our PUD overlay zone discussion, is I do believe that we want to have the range of average lot sizes identified. So although planning commission hasn't requested this when it comes to us,
Sure.
I think we ought to see it, so as long as they're getting more information, not just saying a minimum lot size, but saying per pod, where we've got the minimum number of units and maximum, well then what does that translate to by way of average lot sizes for those pods? They could be a 4,000 to 6,000 average lot size, depending on the minimum to maximum. Does that make sense? That
Which is
way,
part of what we have in Adam.
right, because we have a minimum, and it could be just one meets the minimum, or we could have the majority of the
Yeah, and the other thing
units
was-
are at the minimum.
The request in the zoning change actually allowed them to have a smaller minimum than what was prior. And so a lot of what we talked about as well was requiring them to have a set minimum that was higher than what these zones allow, because it'd be in more line with what was previously there. So especially in the 67 acres on the far.
Of the R121,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
one
Wanted
of
those to be
One of my
Right.
concerns for both of them is they have a section that allows for transfer of units from one pod to another, not to exceed the maximum for that, but with neither mention the minimum lot size as well. So even if we allowed them that maximum number, they would potentially go over that minimum lot size.
And they couldn't, they have to meet both.
Yeah, we have
So,
that.
so yeah, so they have to, if there's a minimum lot size, even though they have a small amount they could transfer, they can't ever go below the minimum.
I'll just be prepared, I'll bring that up with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and to us that was important because there's some lot sizes that are near impossible to have animals on that were allowed in that with the current rezone if it occurred.
Yes.
Well, would you like to take any time?
Sure, frankly, we appreciate all your guys' comments, we're working hard to accommodate them, I think you'll see a nice change. We are, I think frankly, the thing's been resolved in terms of what we're gonna submit with Bryn tomorrow. The only issue I think that we're bumping up against a little bit is, we're happy to reflect that density the way you talked about. We're gonna note it in the bottom so that it will boost the overall density a little bit. We're showing it that way. I think we'd all agree it's inconsistent with your zone, but because you asked for that, we're gonna do it the way you asked, even though it's inconsistent with your zone. Does that make sense? And maybe Bryn, you could talk about that, but the zone has us talk about it in terms of an overall density and do the math that way. We're happy to do it any way you want. We wanna be accommodating. So what in essence it will do, it will show that the density seems a little bit higher, be about 3.2 if the schools left, and I think that's what you were driving at. What's the overall if the schools left? It would be, in the way you calculate it, or want us to calculate, it'd be 3.2 if the schools left. Now, we're under contract with the schools, they're gonna buy it, they wanna do it, they're committed. But if they did, it would be like a 3.2. But we're willing to live with the cap, and presuming the schools stay and build, which is what's anticipated, it'd be the 2.7 we've always talked about. So our thought was, we commit to everything we've always talked about and show for you that really what would happen in a worst case, world falls apart and the schools move, and then it could be as high as the 3 or 3.2, whatever the math ends up. But hopefully that's okay. We can't ever see it going there.
And the only thing that I remember too, with that being said, is, if I remember correctly, it was a 3.2 something if the schools left. But
That's right.
without the schools in there, I believe it was actually a 3.0 because you were still including that property in there. So it's not the 2.75 if it's based on how we've been doing calculations for property in the past.
Agreed.
I guess
And so
that's
that
fair.
was part of it. And then just speaking on Pod 18 one more time, guys, a lot of the reason why we even proposed or said, can we move that up farther, is because our understanding is the property directly south is gonna be a lot larger lots. And that could even be the 1 acre lots there. So to have a bunch of townhomes across the street from the 1 acre lots, we view it wasn't that buffering style that we've tried to stay in line with in the city. We're not saying to take those out, we're just thinking that that may not be the best location for them.
So maybe we can talk about that, because we're anxious to move those. We thought we got a positive, and would love your feedback, those of you from the planning commission who are here. What's not shown on here is geographically, there's a natural slope there. And so what happens is you really will barely be able to see the tops of those townhomes if we put them where they are, which would be a nice way to buffer them, we think, from visual and from others. There were people in the planning commission that said, hey, let's move them over to pod 12. And on a flat screen like this, that looks like, oh, well, that's probably a good deal, maybe it's over in the middle. But if you look at it and you put some topo on there, you'll see that that would put them up on a hill and further accentuate them to your public and for the city. So we're open to consider other things if you guys would like us to. That's not a concern for us, as long as the number doesn't change. But we truly believe that that would be your best site. If you have feedback, we'd love to take that, because we'll be modifying this tomorrow, and tonight, tomorrow. If that's your thought, would you like us to move them still?
For us, it was recommendations and what we talked about for the city council, now it's their turn to sort of look at where they're going with it and their thought as well.
So if we bring it back either way, you guys are okay? You're gonna send it?
The density is something definitely to be considered with the number change, just to make sure it's in line with everything. I'm only one vote.
No, we understand. We
I have
value your
opinions on
vote. We
certain
want,
things as well, so.
we want everybody's vote. We're not
Yeah.
trying to be a pain. So we're anxious to try and make these changes so we can
And
win
I
those
think in the
votes.
last meeting, you got pretty good direction, at least from the city planning on.
And I
on what
think
thought.
the idea was, and I think Clint had mentioned it, that, you know, we don't wanna have developers coming back and then there's another issue we brought up, and then it's another 2 weeks and another issue. I think it's fair to the developers that we ought to give them direction, say, is there anything else we need? Not
Yeah.
bring up another, and I think that was the understanding as we had Thursday
Yeah.
night.
And that's
So
why
quick
I'm,
question before we leave 16, what would you like us to have the map look like? Because we think it would be in the city's best interest to leave 16 right where it is, so that it has a buffer because of the geography.
18.
I'm sorry, 18, I need
The
to,
town.
I'm aging. But 18, what would you like us to do there then? We think the natural buffer is in your best interests, but we're happy to move that over or do something different if you
I think I'm gonna make a suggestion, if I can. When I know the topo in this area, I think it'd be advantageous to go look at it. And if you want, you can schedule that with some staff, take you up there and have you see it, the plan. Cause I think that's important. What he is describing is correct. It will, I hate to use this word, but kind of hide it away a little bit. And if you're on the hilltop, it'll really accentuate. He's right on what he's saying.
Sure.
And I think it'd be powerful for you, and then it makes you, helps you with your better decision making.
Yeah.
But go with staff, we'd be glad to do that with
That
you.
makes sense.
Okay, that's with council too, by the way.
And to the mayor's point of wanting to get everything on the map, that's why I'm suggesting that I would like to see those average lot sizes, not just minimum lot sizes for the pods. So let's make sure that that comes back, even if it's a range from the minimum to maximum number of units proposed dictating that average range of lots, so that we have it when we look at it.
Do you like the fact too that what we also try to do is avoid any kind of idea that there's a game going on? So we've agreed to an absolute cap with regard to those units. And that way, we felt like that protected you. So while everybody kind of got caught up on this density, is it 2.7, is it 3.0, is it 2? I mean, our view is if you have an absolute cap on the units, you're protected irrespective of the other. Is that, maybe that didn't come through and we apologize. That was sort of what our confusion was that night. So does that help or does it not really?
Well, I think PUD overlay zone is sort of, I mean, you have a cap, and then it gives you a lot of leeway on it, that's sort of what the overlay zone sort of does.
Well,
And we want to balance community.
Right, but I guess in working with other cities, one of the things we found that they really, really like, and that's why we kind of threw this out for you, is if you have kind of the formulas that your staff have asked for, minimum size lots, amounts in each pod, and then a total cap, people can play with things, but at the end of the day, there's a floor and there's a cap. And that way it just allows for some flexibility, because we don't know exactly how everything's gonna lay out, but it gives protection to the city. And so our thought was with those three pieces and I think we're happy to do the average, you know, and because we're not trying to play games with any of that. We're just trying to say, here's your box to play in. And we won't go above the box, we won't go below. We have a little bit of flexibility, because we all know development has to go exactly like everybody plans. But if we play in the box, then we're okay to move things a little bit and adjust, and you're protected, the developer's protected, everybody's happy. But is that fair to everybody? We wanna we truly just wanna help and get it done and move forward.
The purpose of me suggesting that we need those average lot sizes is because when people hear 2.7 units to the acre, they think, well, that's a third acre, right? Everyone thinks that. And so they look, and even though we say, well, the minimum square foot lot size could be 4,000 or 6,000 square feet, there's been some suggestion, well, that's only a few of them would be that way.
Right.
And so we really need to be very transparent. The third or fourth leg of this stool is transparency for our public so that they know the average lot sizes in whatever pod are really whatever. Because 2.7 sounds like third acres, and they'll find out pretty fast it's actually a lot less than that.
Sure. But again, we're committed to that because as you can see, we can't play any games. I mean, even though the public might feel, the uneducated group that doesn't know that you have to take roads out and other stuff, and again, it's not that they're negative, they just don't work in this world. We all do, all of us around this room. So the idea would be, for unit counts, that's how you really protect the public, is we say, here's your unit count, you can't go above this. I mean, I can't change a public perception, I don't know whether this person knows what density means or not, and it's different in different cities. But if you give them a unit count, you say, hey, here's the maximum.
I'll just mention one of the things I'm concerned about with
Please, Jared,
the flexibility. Your flexibility is our uncertainty,
Right.
right? So I understand there are some things we don't know for sure until we really get into the topography and start building things. There needs to be some flexibility, but from the public's perspective, having been on that side of it, they're shown these pretty maps, and they're told this is how many units are going to go in this pod, and this is what the average lot size is going to be. And then if something changes and we allow this many to get shifted over there, that changes that pod dramatically from what the public has seen. So that's kind of, at least I feel, the angle of
That's a great point.
So I'd like to see that minimum lot size, so we know it's based on two things, that cap is two things. One, a hard number, but also some protection to the lot sizes in each pod, of what we're advertising.
One thing you might like, Jared, and I'll go to that, if you can look in that summary at the bottom, you'll see even the largest pod, I believe, don't hold me to this, but when we talk about the possible density transfers, there's
Not
only roughly, you'll see the density transfers, there may be 10 or there may be 12 in one of those big ones. I mean, we're talking a few lots. We're not talking wholesale, you can
That
move
looks
it.
better than this other one.
Does that make sense? Look at the far right, you can see those density transfers and the difference. The high would go from 62 to 74. That doesn't mean 74 units can transfer, it's the difference between
Right.
12. And so 26, you can see there'd be 5 units change. In one, it would go 15 to 18. So your staff's been very, very vigilant with us on that. And we try to be really careful. So there's a few lots, but it's really, we got the Clomar issues, we got the open space issues, we've got environmental issues. And everybody was sensitive to the fact that we may have one of those pods that's, we got a big issue with Clomar. So a whole bunch of units in that one is gonna be a beautiful open space for you. We need to be able to move a few of those lots to a different one.
Right.
Those-
Yeah, no,
does-
I
does that
understand, and
feel good as
this
you
helps a
look at
lot,
that
because those
Okay.
differences aren't nearly as alarming as some of these others.
Good.
And I think this is in line with what everyone's talking about.
Does that
It
feel good
helps
to
out
you
a lot.
guys too?
The one part that always raises the questions is when we throw out the number of, we only have this density, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, and we have more units per acre than we've ever had. And that's the part that really gets to, us, because we want that balanced development. We want the quarter acres, we want the 0.2 acres, we want some that are over half acres, we want the balance, so that if we really stay in line with the vision of the city, it's you move here, you stay here, you die here. I mean, it is what it is.
Right.
And so if that's what we're trying to accomplish, when we keep getting developments where it's like, we have 10 units per acre, and then we got 20 third acres.
Right.
We don't have the vision in line. And that's one of the fears that occurs that we try to control, and that's why the pods and this is important to us.
And I think you'll really like the way this turned out. Two or three things, just really quick. When we changed to that R21, and now that we've moved any of the elderly living or that type of living out of there, you're gonna see now we have to average 2 per acre, 2 per acre in that area. And so that's what the average has to be. So we're gonna have to have, could we have a couple smaller lots or a few small? Sure, we're gonna have to average that. And then you couple that with the fact that we put that trail in that adds animal rights and the trail system through there. We think it's really, we really try to accommodate the intent up there. So I hope that will help you. Tim's got a
The
comment.
net effect of that R21 is we're capped at 2 units per acre. We have minimum lot sizes, and Coralie, yes, we can put the average range in there, so there's no question. But it almost guarantees lot disparity. They're all gonna be the same size. They're gonna have minimums, and they're gonna go up from there, and every range in between, based on the layout.
Right.
And then you can't transfer in that zone because you're capped at 2 units per acre.
So, again, just one final thing, because we don't want to be viewed as any kind of a bait and switch. If we put it in like we've been talking about, you're gonna see one of those numbers in this star. It'll say like 3.2 density. Nothing will have changed. It'll just be this kind of unique calculation you've asked for. It's still the 2.7 it's always been. We just don't want somebody to say, oh, see, now they're playing games or doing something. We're just calculating the way you ask us to. It'll be 3.2.
This is the
If
graph
the
that the
school's
planning commission was looking at, so if you look on the acres under the land use summary on the left side, the question came up because where it has the 2 blue, the middle school and the elementary
Correct.
go down a little bit more. You have those acres of those 2 pods for the middle school and the elementary that are calculated into how the overall density is figured. Which again is to the 275 acres total. But when you take the total, the 1021, divide it by by all of the acres included, that's where the planning commission came up with that higher number. Then the question came up of the other, if the schools don't go there, in parentheses, you have additional density that may go back in, which would actually then it would keep that acreage there where you've already factored it in once, and now add more units to it, which may increase that overall density. So that's where the question came in.
So I think what Doyle is saying, we'll have 2 tables, one with schools, one without
One
schools.
without.
But what you have to appreciate is that, and the reason it's there, it's not a gaming effort. The school, we're under contract, we will probably, I guess it's being taped still, it is what it is, but we anticipate closing with the schools within the next month or so. I mean, that's how serious the schools are. The build here, they're excited about it, they're ready to go. So we're putting these numbers in as sort of a request from planning commission and council, but the bottom line is the schools are gonna be buying that. Well, they can't buy property and basically have no ability to do it. In other words, if they buy it, they're gonna own it. And so we can't enter into an agreement and have them buy property, and then if they have to sell it to somebody else, have them say, well, there's no ability to build on it, you can't do anything with it. Does that make sense? But that's not their intent, that's not the goal, so that's why we're just putting that number into the side to tell you about that. But
And then just while we're on it, just so you know, the gross density at the top of the site summary where it says 2.75, the math that we were doing is the 1021 and the 339.39. Well, if you do that, it does equal 392.75.
Not 2.7.
And so that's, and I think you understand how we were calculating, Tim, that's fine, but to us, there never was a 2.75, there was a 3 and a 3.2.
Understand.
And so.
And that's all we say is that's inconsistent with the way your zone calculates it, just so you guys know. But we can understand how you're doing it,
Yeah.
but that's not how your zone did it.
Well, and I'd like our staff to clarify.
Yeah, I wanna clarify, because that's how we've always understood it.
What,
At least
and
from
again,
ours.
I can see, the interpretation, it's interpretation always, but what it says is you calculate density based on the total project area. I would not probably view the schools as part of the project, they're selling it to the schools, it's not counted as open space. If it was counted as open space, that's a totally different argument, but it's not counted as open space, they're selling it out separately. So again, I wouldn't include it, but again, I can see the argument both ways probably.
Well, can we clarify that then when we adopt the updated ordinance?
Sure,
Can we
yeah.
please put a note and make sure
that'd
that
be
they don't include that in the
Does that make
project
sense?
plan, because that's
Well,
not
no,
our
we get it,
intent.
Yeah.
I understand where you're.
I mean, I can see why they counted it that way, but.
And for us, we had to show, one of the conditions with the contract with the school is we have to have an entitlement, right, in order for them to go forward, so that's why we viewed it as part of the plan.
And that's kind of like realistically, we've seen that a ton of times. The school purchase property and then
And
for
then
whatever
doesn't.
reason, they don't want to put a school there anymore. And so from our perspective, residents need to know
What could it be?
be.
And I don't think the question was ever necessarily the numbers, it was
How it's
how
done.
they'd calculated and what, you know what I mean? I think it was just to clarify
Yeah.
what it was, and that's what they're gonna fix all that on the new plan for you guys.
Thank you. Okay, let's, it's okay, I think we need to get this 2.4, 2.5, because they're on for possible action. Then we can take a break. Discussion on the local consent for on-premises beer, recreation, liquor.
So I was gonna be really brief with that, we'll have Real come and present their item for this. This is for selling beer at the games in the Real Stadium. We went and had a tour with the ADC, they're going to approve it, but they can't do it without a local consent. So I invited RSL to come, do a presentation, and the council's the only one that can offer, so give us that local consent. So if you had any questions, I just wanted to clarify that issue.
I'm here if there's any questions on that too.
They said they'd send the best looking person
I
from
don't know about
RSL.
that, it's a scruffy old looking one, I think, so, yeah.
So you'll be presenting there, but that's the whole story.
Good. Okay, discussion regarding the ice skating program rental.
You'll have an ordinance before you tonight to enact the hours of operation as well as the fee structure that we've established and presented on September 13th in the work session. Just wanted to make sure there weren't any questions or concerns before we move forward with that.
My only thought was, because we have a separate fee structure that we're adopting at a later point in the agenda, should we perhaps combine the fee structure, certainly set the hours, but combine all the fee structures into one document? But if we need to adopt it now just to get the show on the road, we can do that, and that's great, but we may want to consider that for the future, so it's easier to do one mass adoption at the beginning of each year or whatever.
We saw that and we knew that this was coming up, so we put this on, but we think we should redo all our fee structure.
Okay. The other comment,
And the big fee structure is the whole everything.
Right.
It's everything, it's every permit, everything, so we couldn't tackle that animal right now, that's why we're saying go ahead with this, so we get this one done, so we move forward, so we have people ice skating come this season, and then we'll approach going to the whole fee schedule.
Question that Wendy, I have too, is how did we come up with these rates?
Remember, Mayor, we had a presentation by Wendy, what date was it, and she showed you the rates and how she
Right,
studied
I
every
remember
city.
seeing it, but I mean, just for.
We just did a comparison with other local rates in the area.
the other thought I had, it references twice in the packet, the Jordan School District holiday hours would potentially open up additional operating hours. I wonder if we should just clarify either local school district or charter school or whatever, just so that if you find that there may be some dates that don't overlap, but you want to open for one and not the other, or vice versa, that you have that flexibility. Would you
So
like-
it currently says the ice ribbon may open earlier during Jordan School District winter recess and some observed holidays. Just because those dates will change or can change potentially in the future, and that just made it a little
We
more
can tinker
easy
with
for
that
me
language.
to.
My suggestion was just to say either Harriman schools or add in charter schools in addition to that, just so if you find that a charter school continues their winter recess, for example, a couple of days extra, and you want to capture that.
How about if we just say if the need arises?
There you go.
As need arises. Excellent. We could even just, are you saying strike the
Yeah.
Jordan district?
So we can just do what we want to.
Absolutely. I like that suggestion, John. Well then, yes, as need arises.
This is a question for John and Wendy too. What do we do are we gonna have some signage in terms of after-hour usage? Because, in terms of liability.
That's why we brought it up as an ordinance, because we gotta have a start or a close time on an ordinance or we can't enforce it.
Okay, yeah, because certainly the ice will be available after hours, somebody could come down and get hurt and then. Okay, can I just, for just a minute, review the agenda tonight? If it will be okay with everyone, I'm anticipating here's what I'd like to just suggest we do in regards to public comment. That in the normal area that we will have it tonight, if we could say something to the effect, any public comment that does not deal with Adeline, that we'll take public comment for those items, because we have some presentation, I just don't want people, and then we could have a public comment portion just prior to the 6.3 issue. That way the information's fresh as we look at making decisions. How do you feel? You okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
Great. Yeah. That way we have two of them, and that way, because we do have, Harriman Royalty will be here, and then they have the Healthy Harriman Share. So rather than have them wait for a lengthy public comment potentially, that way we could do this. Did you have a question?
I'm just gonna ask for, is there anything special you want us to do procedurally? Just indicate that we'll temporarily close our public comment and continue it until before 6.1, or do you care?
If you're going to open it up
We're
for,
not talking about this.
if you wanna open it up for public comment there, just declare that you're gonna open it up.
Okay.
So we don't have to say continue, we can just.
You can open them up multiple times in your meeting, and I think just let the people know that they can talk.
Sounds good.
Okay, so, I guess we could try to come back and do a couple more items if you want to, or do you just want to go into?
We have a lengthy work item in the staff that was done.
Yeah.
We
Check a couple of
split it,
those
so
off in the
we
next
can.
30 minutes.
We can't. We just put the ones that had to be talked about.
And just so you know, anything that you decide to move off this agenda, December 13th agenda is already longer than this one. That's potential.
Sounds great.
Just letting you know, it's just.
And rocks at the bottom.
Well, here's a thought, should we do 8.1? How long will that take?
Depends on how long you want to discuss it. Take a long
That's a
time,
loaded skinny.
take a few minutes.
Well, why don't we try, is that okay with everyone? We'll just,
a few minute version.
okay.
The 3-minute version they got.
It's just open for discussion. So you all were sent a proposed master fee schedule for parks. In that fee schedule, we added some fees that are currently supposed to be charged that are not currently in the fee schedule. We also added some of our new parks and amenities into that fee schedule and made some adjustments to some of the current renewals. I don't know if you all had any questions about any of the proposed fee changes.
This the one had maybe a typo, I'm thinking it's Rosecrest Park, 56,000 west.
Okay. Rosecrest.
Third line down, I'm assuming it's Rosecrest Park, 5600 west.
Yes. It is. I'm on the.
I have two things. First, so this is on page 420 of our packet. It's page 1 of the ordinance, and it leaves C blank. Is that intentional?
I would have to see how it looks in your packet.
He's not bringing that up, he's bringing his PowerPoint. Do you want to bring the packet up?
Sure. You know, it just indicated groups that can use for a sponsored function, city council, planning, zoning, Herman City Arts, county, state, federal, others is approved, and I didn't know if there was a C that was deleted that we could consider, if that was just a typographical.
Let me find out, hold on.
You have something you want me to bring up?
She was referring to a page in the packet, but I have it right here. Okay, Corley, please repeat where you're at. Sorry, I was on a different page.
I'm on the ordinance, so it is, under the staff report, there's the first page, and then the second is the proposed ordinance.
Yes.
And leaves C blank on my version.
It's under item 3C.
Okay, so that used to say Board of Adjustment,
Oh,
so we just struck that.
we don't need that. Okay. The other thing I
So we just need to
wondered
fix that.
is on the usage fee, for example, it has a range from 200 to 500. what indicates that? Is it a time limit, number of hours, or some other factor that causes those fees to vary?
So that's how it's currently set up that's how it's currently written.
Okay.
My guess is that, when you look on the fee schedule, it depends on if it's a half day or a full day.
So we'd like to leave that, that's great. The other thing I wondered, we had a challenge where a resident called to reserve a pavilion at the reservoir, and I cannot honestly remember the timeliness of his request.
It was 3 days before.
Was it 3 days? And so I noted in this one, it said reservations made less than 48 hours in advance, cannot be made. So if there is an opening the next day, and we have availability, what challenges does it present to staff to go ahead and let them do that?
It's not that big of a challenge. What we're discussing is starting to have staff go out in between pavilion rentals to clean up after, make sure the garbages are not overflowing, make sure there's not a mess in the bathrooms. So it just helps us staff-wise to better prepare for that, but I don't see it. If you wanted to go 36 hours, that's fine, 24 hours even. Just, otherwise it's open and free use anyway, if we don't take the reservation, so.
Would you have any heartburn if we just struck that? Just
The well, I think we would need some time to prepare, but I don't think that I think you could go shorter period of time.
Because we're gonna be in charging the fee, we wanna make sure, to your point, we wanna make sure that staff has time to go out and prepare the site.
Right, and we also post signs at the pavilions that indicate who has the use. So I would like some amount of time, but 24 hours may be sufficient.
24 hours is good.
And when it comes to cash, say they use, I'll tell you the one that really hurts really hard was, years ago when they used the Rosecrest Pavilion for a wedding. We got hit with, it was about almost a $2,000 rental fee because of what they wanted to use and how long. And the check bounced.
Oh, no.
So we didn't have time to get the check cleared. So this allows them, if they're paying by check, we can actually make sure they have sufficient funds and it's clear.
Did we change this so we can't take checks?
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's the rarity, but this is just planning, make sure everything's in place and. So if
We still take
have a fee.
that you're asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
For some reason, I wanna say I remember it's,
We don't take.
we talked about it.
In the utility billing, we don't take checks for a shut off. If they've been shut off, they have to bring cash.
But they can pay their bill at check, but not shut off.
So, here's a thought to go along with that point. We could certainly indicate reservations cannot be made less than 24 hours in advance if paid with cash or credit card, or what would you
Secured
recommend?
funds.
96 hours in advance, or
Secure funds,
That's an analysis.
if paid with secured
We electronically deposit our checks, so we know within 2 business days.
or 72 hours. And maybe we say instead of just hours,
Say 2 business days.
yeah.
Thanks.
So 24 hours, maybe parentheses, 1 business day, if paid with secured funds, or 72 hours, 3 business days, if paid with a check. Something along that line.
Absolutely.
Okay. That way, it gives our residents some flexibility to make reservations if they have something come up, but it doesn't put the city out there holding money that doesn't come into us.
And it gives us a chance to make sure we have secure funds and then we don't end up with a unsightly.
Say give staff enough notice to
Right,
do what they need
right.
to.
Agreed.
Because everybody doesn't leave it clean when they leave.
One of the things, you've got a number of items about prohibiting smoking alcohol, but there's nothing about sexual content or other materials.
Right.
Don't know if that is something we want there. I know it sounds, I'm just thinking if a group came up there and displayed pictures or stuff that's offensive that we wouldn't wanna have in full view.
Does that get into a free
Freedom of
speech and
speech issue.
an obscenity issue? Good luck writing that one, John.
John and I
Have
will
fun.
work together on that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever burns my eyes, you can.
Exactly. Meets the tolerance of the public.
Any other input?
Not on that one.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just accept a motion, then we'll temporarily, I think, recess.
Adjourn our work. So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Mayor Nicole has arrived.
She's here. Looking like it.